Aloha ahi ahi akakop. Aloha. My name is Keauhou, and I'm privileged to serve as the first Deputy Director for the Hawaii Department of Land and Natural Resources. And I'm very blessed to have been able to spend the day here in beautiful Kona in Keauhou. I am from Kaneohe, Oahu, not from Big Island. I wish I was. But it's such a pleasure to be here with all of you tonight. Before I say anything else, I would like to acknowledge, as part of, if I may, cultural protocol, to ask our kupuna, Auntie Lily Kong, if she wouldn't mind opening our meeting with a pule.
I'm glad to see all of you. And I hope somehow that God will help us. I will pray in Hawaiian, and I will translate in English. So let us pray. I want you to pray too, not just listen to me. In your heart, use your heart and mind, and your love for everything that you believe in. Eleha kumako inau na mauna. Malela mai ko kua e hiki mai. Nana na Yesu mai ko kua. Nana no e hana kalani a me kahanua. I will lift my eyes to the hill, where my help comes from. It comes from the Lord, and this I thank you very much. Amen.
Mahalo, Auntie Lily. Just met her tonight, and I'm so privileged because I know she is Ike Kupuna, born and raised Keauhou, and I so appreciate that. So having said that, ladies and gentlemen, you folks are here to provide comments and maybe understand a little bit about what the Department of Land and Natural Resources is trying to do in Keauhou. You folks, I'm sure many of you, we actually met this morning on the bay, and it's a great opportunity for myself as well as the staff to have an intimate, candid discussion about what would be possible. Yeah, what are we actually looking at doing, and what would the community support? And bottom line, in my life's journey, especially with DLNR, it's actually engaging with communities. That's my personal passion, because at the end of the day, we cannot do everything we want to do without community support and acceptance. And so with that, I would like to share for tonight, just laying it out front, that we have no predetermined decision as far as whether there would be additional moorings added in Keauhou Bay. Okay? Just for the record. Yeah, thank you for that. But this is part, because as civil servants, we have an obligation to actually look at what the potential impacts would be, and of course solicit feedback from the community who knows the area best. And so tonight, I would ask that you open heart, open mind, be able to share with us some of your mana'o, yeah, as folks from this community. We have this facility until 8 o'clock. We actually have to close the doors at 8 o'clock. I would ask, I believe we have about 25 people signed up to provide oral comments. After I speak now, I'm going to call one of our engineers, Finn McCall, who's been working on the project. He'll give you an overview of why we are where we are today, and then also tell you a little bit about some of the alternatives that are being considered, okay? The point I want to make is that we definitely want to solicit your oral feedback tonight, but most importantly is if you can provide us written comments on all of the proposals, the environmental assessment, whatever you want to share with us that we maybe have missed or perhaps you support. That will be critical in this process. And real quickly, forgive me, I know a lot of folks here are much smarter at this than I am, but what we're presenting tonight is what's called an environmental assessment. Okay, so we had a consultant come and do all of these environmental studies, do a cultural impact analysis, a CIA, as to what these alternatives would impact. So this is part of that process, is now coming back to the community, asking for your feedback. If you haven't seen this report, it is available on our website, DLNR, and most public libraries, there are hard copies. But feel free to pull me aside. I wore bright orange for a reason tonight, so that you can point me out and ask me questions, and I'll help you to guide you to the right place. The public comment period is open now. It's a 30-day period that will end April 22nd. So another week or so, we would like you to provide feedback. And Finn will talk about how you can do that. But again, written comments are really important, okay, to make sure that we capture what your comments are. What happens is we collect all of that, and then we are required by law to respond to each of your comments in this process. And that is then distributed public information for everyone to see. So it's transparent in the process. If you would like, we have here 3 diagrams of the alternatives being considered. Finn is going to show it up on the big screen, but these are the 3 that are currently being considered. And just to be clear, there are 9 moorings now, potentially 16 moorings. Another 7 could be put in, according to these diagrams. But it could go anywhere between that, provided it's within the existing footprints that are shown here. It could be another 1, 2, 3, up to 7 additional. But I will tell you, as leadership here now, DLR, again, there's no predetermined decision with this. This is all part of the process. What happens is all of this information is collected, and ultimately it's the Board of Land and Natural Resources that makes the determination on whether or not they would want to consider adding more moorings to this bay, okay? So this is part of that process to give them an informed decision-making process, yeah? We have comment cards or comment sheets on both sides. If you need, if you'd like, feel free to fill that out and drop it off with any of our staff tonight. Just to point them out, William Nahale from our boating division here on Big Island, Mr. Ed Underwood, administrator for our boating division here tonight, and Finn McCall, our engineering, one of our engineering staff, and again, Keauhou. So feel free to flag any of us. I would like to ask, being that we have 25 people signed up to speak tonight, I encourage that, but I would like to ask for some level of respect, and I promise we will do the same. We're here to listen. But being that we have so many folks and limited time, I would like to ask those speaking if we keep your comments to about 2 minutes, out of respect for everyone else that wants to speak. If we have time after that, you're more than welcome to come back up and continue any comments that you have. Unless someone would like to offer to be timekeeper, if you trust me with that, I'm happy to try and keep it to about 2 minutes and just kindly ask you to wrap up if so. Is that okay? Mahalo for that. Right. So with that, I'm going to ask Finn to give you some background and kind of talk to you about what the alternatives are. Again, no predetermined decision on any of this. We are here primarily, in my heart, my soul, is to make right with the bay, right? So as you folks know, some of those moorings are considered unpermitted by federal law. So we're trying to clean up the bay with what's there now. Whether there should be additional moorings, that is a secondary consideration. But primarily, it's being able to align those current moorings to standards that would meet the federal requirements. And of course, secondly, and equal to my heart, is how we make right to the recreational users of the bay, right? The canoe clubs, the kayakers, the paddlers, and the fishers, who all live and know this bay so well. So that's all part of the consideration tonight. So with that, mahalo, please welcome Finn McCall.
That's wait a minute. Oh, what's going on? Yeah. Aloha, everyone. Like Keikoa said, my name is Finn McCall. I'm with the DLNR Division of Boating and Ocean Recreation Engineering Branch. I've been tasked with administering the contract for doing the draft EA and seeing this project through. So to start off, I'm going to wait for William to find the light switch. Yeah. Okay, first we're going to go over the kind of the goals of this meeting that Keikoa had already mentioned. First is to outline the purpose and the need of the project, describe the project background and development of how we got to the proposed project and the alternatives, provide a summary of the findings and conclusions of the draft EA, and solicit public comments. Like Keikoa said, public comments are due by April 22nd and need to be submitted in writing in order to be considered in the draft EA. We have comment forms at either door here, and you can give them to our staff at the end of this meeting, or you can email directly to myself or the consultant. And also to reiterate what Keikoa said, after we review all the comments and ultimately the Board of Land and Natural Resources will make the final determination as to what the final number of moorings in the bay is going to be. So, number one goal of this project is that is to replace the current unpermitted moorings with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. That's required by federal law. There are some moorings that are, according to the U.S. Coast Guard navigational charts, there are some moorings that are within the channel. So we're going to verify that whether or not those need to be relocated out of the channel or whether or not that channel may need to be redesignated by the Coast Guard. Also to provide unrestricted access to all the existing users of the bay and provide additional moorings where practicable to accommodate the demand for additional moorings here on the Kona coastline. Sure. So a little project background. At the beginning of this story here, there was a 1985 study done by the Army Corps of Engineers that looked at all of the small boat harbors within the state of Hawaii. And for Keauhou specifically, it had identified that there were 24 moorings within Keauhou Bay. In 1992, when all the small boat harbors in the state of Hawaii were transferred to DLNR from Department of Transportation, RMTAL submitted a report documenting all of those facilities. And in that report, it noted that there were, Keauhou Bay accommodated 19 vessels, up to 19 vessels. In September 2012, there was an offering made for 8 additional moorings in Keauhou Bay. And subsequently after that, we solicited bids to survey, perform a feasibility study, do the permitting, and for the installation of up to 17 moorings, being the 9 existing plus the 8. In January, May, and July of 2013, there were various meetings held. The first few were with the mooring permittees, and the latter ones were with the general public community. And in March 2014, there was a lawsuit filed against Department of Land and Natural Resources, contending that we were not properly addressing the environmental impacts of this project. It was initially thought that DLNR would be exempt from being required to do an EA. And at the suggestion of our attorney generals and because of the lawsuit, we went forward with doing the draft EA. And in June of 2015, we procured the services of consultant Anchor QEA LLC to conduct the environmental assessment. Yes, sorry. Here is an example of some of the existing moorings in the bay. As you can see, some of them are located right next to corals. Some are actual just train wheels, and even in some cases, the chains are actually wrapped around coral heads. And so, one of the goals of this project is to clean up this situation and install new, properly environmental friendly moorings that would replace these existing moorings. Here's just another photo. It's kind of hard to see from where you're sitting probably, but just kind of similar thing. There's chains that are dragging along the sea floor and just affecting the general marine environment. So here is what the proposed project was when the draft EA was initially released. And this was the arrangement that was determined from the feasibility study. So as it's shown here, there are a total of 16 vessels in the bay. There are 5 vessels on the north side of the entrance channel. I'll try it. This here is the entrance channel. This is the north side. This is the south side. This is the loading pier, boat ramp, and this is the bulkhead here at Keauhou Bay. So this was the original proposed project, and after we had several meetings and got feedback from members of the community, one of the biggest issues that came up was the vessels on the north side of the bay. So what we decided for an alternative to look into, this is our alternative one, still accommodates 16 vessels, but we created it so that there are 12 offshore moorings on the south side of the bay here, and then 4 vessels along the loading pier. And we've discussed this morning with various members of the community, and just want to reiterate that this is not necessarily going to be the final project that is going to be built. This was one of the alternatives that was analyzed in the EA. The second alternative from the proposed project was to just relocate all 9 existing moorings to the south side of the bay, shown right here. So I'm going to go through pretty briefly the conclusions and findings of the draft EA. It's very brief, and I know that there are numerous issues that folks have with what these findings of the EA are. I'm just going to go through with what the actual conclusions were. So all of these bullet points relate to the Hawaii administrative rules that describe what is supposed to be analyzed when doing an environmental assessment. So one of the first one is whether or not the project creates an irrevocable commitment or loss or destruction of natural or cultural resources. The draft EA found that no significant impacts on natural resources would be developed from the project. The proposed project did identify potential impact to cultural resources, particularly navigation for canoe paddling and recreational use of the bay. So alternatives 1 and 2, with all of the vessels on the south side of the bay, provided mitigation for potential impacts to those cultural resources. The next is whether that the project is would the project curtail the range of beneficial uses of the environment? And the draft EA found that the proposed project did propose potential impacts to the navigation of motorized and non-motorized uses of the bay, and that alternatives 1 and 2 were intended to mitigate those potential impacts. Third item that's analyzed in the EA process is whether or not there's conflicts with the state's long-term environmental policies. Those are identified in Hawaii Revised Statute, Chapter 344. And the goals of 344 are to conserve natural resources and enhance the quality of life. Then in the draft EA, it indicated that the proposed project and the alternatives intend to improve the environmental and recreational conditions in the bay, and therefore did not have a significant impact. Sorry. Okay. The next factor that is looked at is whether or not there's impacts to the economic or social welfare of the community or the state. One of the economic impacts would be the state would collect fees for moorings, but that the existing uses of the bay would not be obstructed, being the motorized and non-motorized uses of the bay. Next thing that's looked at is whether or not there's impacts to public health. The proposed project poses potential impacts to navigation, but alternatives 1 and 2 would mitigate those impacts and would therefore avoid impacts to the actual public health. The next thing that looked at is whether there's substantial secondary impacts, such as population changes or effects on public facilities. And the draft EA indicated that there were not significant secondary impacts that were anticipated. The next thing that's looked at is whether there's substantial degradation of the environmental quality. And the draft EA concluded that the proposed project and alternatives 1 and 2 intention is to improve the environmental quality. Next thing that looks at is whether there's cumulative impacts with future projects. And as there are not any future significant projects proposed for Keauhou Bay, the draft EA concluded that there wouldn't be significant cumulative impacts. The next item that's looked at is whether or not substantial impacts are made to rare, threatened, or endangered species. And the draft EA concluded that both the proposed project and alternatives intend to improve the current impacts to the marine environment. The next item is whether or not there's substantial impacts to air or water quality or ambient noise. And the draft EA concluded that there were no significant impacts to air, water quality, or ambient noise conditions. The next item that's looked at is whether or not there's substantial effect on scenic vistas and view planes in county and state plans or studies. The proposed project, it was noted that it would impact view planes on the north side of the harbor, and that alternatives 1 and 2 would not have significant impacts to view planes on the south side of the harbor, and that no scenic vistas or view planes in county or state plans or studies were affected. I think this is the last slide on the findings. The next thing that's looked at is whether there's damage as a result of being located in a floodplain, tsunami zone, erosion-prone area, geologically hazardous area, estuary, freshwater, or coastal areas. And in the EA, it notes that the proposed project, alternatives 1 and 2, and the existing moorings are all within the tsunami zone and in a coastal area. The proposed project and alternatives 1 or 2 are intended to improve upon the existing mooring systems and therefore reduce the risk of damage, and that new moorings are not designed for inclement weather or tsunami conditions. And the last thing that's looked at is whether the draft EA, or whether or not the project poses a substantial increase in energy consumption. And the draft EA concluded that the proposed project and alternatives did not result in a substantial increase in energy usage. And this is a schematic of the proposed mooring design. It's very similar to, what the existing moorings are. One thing that's not shown in here that would be incorporated is there would be a submerged buoy attached to the chains here to keep the chain floating and away from the seafloor in all conditions. And that's the end of the presentation here, and we're going to go ahead and turn it over for public comments. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we look forward to hearing your comments. Mahalo.